Hi, my name's John. I'm the owner, I guess, of this YouTube channel. And today I thought I would talk about the code that never was, or the proposed changes to the Code of Points that would have come out in 2005. That's not what happened. The 2001 code was used for an additional year, and then in 2006 we got the open ended difficulty code that we're used to now. So, in part, this is kind of an exploration of what could have been had the FIG retained a code of points with a 10.0 maximum start value and not gone in the direction of open ended difficulty. So, this is not going to be an exhaustive description of this proposed code of points. If you're sort of looking kind of for that information in conjunction with what I'll say here about what would have been new, you might consider watching my video about the 2001 through 2004 Code of Points. One proposed change to this code this potential code that I would have actually really liked was a change to the base score. So in 2004, the base score was 8.8, meaning that gymnasts had to earn 1.2 in bonus from difficulty and connections in order to have a full start value, which I always thought was a lot, especially because of the sort of impoverished connections that were available, particularly on the floor. So during this era, pretty much every routine had numerous jump, leap, connections, lots of double twisting, tuck jumps, and things of that nature, because it really was impossible to have a 10.0 start value just from tumbling. This code proposal would have changed that, so the new base score would have been 9.0. And as we'll talk about later, there would have been more generous connections, especially on the floor exercise. Skill values were going to remain the same as they had during the previous Olympic cycle. Elements would have ranged in value from A all the way through E, and then the final category was called Super E for some reason, as opposed to what we now call it, which is F. As sort of a throwback to the originality rules of the 1979 through 1984 Code of Points, a gymnast who performed a Super E element for the first time would have gotten 0.4 as opposed to the normal 0.3 in bonus for that element at that competition. So I imagine when, like, Diane Dos Santos performed a piked double Arabian for the first time, that would have been worth at the 2003 Worlds 0.4 instead of 0.3, at least for the World Championships. There was also going to be a change that I would have really liked in terms of repetition rules for the balance beam. The CCC connection would have allowed you to do the same three elements for that connection. So in other words, we would have seen the return of three layout step outs in a row, and that connection would have been worth 0.2. They were going to crack down on handstands on the uneven bars. If you didn't finish the element within 10 degrees of handstand, you would have lost a value part, meaning a C element would have been downgraded to a B element, and so forth. That's a rule that we're used to now, but if you watch routines from 2004, you will see many gymnasts doing pirouetting elements do not finish as close to the handstand as we expect nowadays. Now, they were going to allow some leeway for pirouetting elements connected to releases or dismounts, in which case you would have only had to finish within 30 degrees of handstand, which I think makes sense. In order to qualify for the event finals on vaulting, a change in terms of variety was going to be that only one of your two vaults could be from group 4 or 5. So group 4 in this proposed code was going to include the Yurchenko vaults and the full twisting Yurchenko vaults. Those were going to be condensed because they both had backward entries onto the vaulting table. And then group 5 was going to be the half twisting on style of Yurchenkos, like the Chang vault that we know now. So only one of your vaults could be from either of those groups, forcing you to either do a front handspring or Tsukahara or something like that for your second vault. So that would have really affected gymnasts like Anna Pavlova, who did double twisting Yurchenkos and then a laid out Podkapayeva vault as her second vault. On bars, they were going to sort of raise the requirement for getting 0.2 in connection for DE connections, such that one of those elements was now going to have to require flight. That's something that we're used to now, and something that I was introduced in 2013, I believe, because you might remember that prior to 2013, gymnasts like Mustafina would do a full twisting Stalder, I think it was, on the low bar into a Van Leeuwen that used to be worth 0.2. Now it's just worth 0.1, right? I think so. I think to get 0.2. Oh, actually, okay, here's what it was. Nowadays, both elements have to involve flight. Back in 2004, though, you could do two pirouetting elements, and as long as one was a D, one was an E, you got 0.2 in connection. That would have changed in this 2005 proposal. One thing to keep in mind, though, that was also different during this era is that most of the sort of full twisting L-grip giant elements that were used to being E's nowadays, they were all D's back then, with one exception, which was the B, named after B Wenjing, and that was the forward giant in L-grip with a full turn on one arm, the other arm flaring out to the side and ending in reverse grip. That was the one of those that was an E element. For some reason, they were proposing a 0.05 deduction if you did a straddled cast to handstand more than once. I don't know why they cared about that. I never had a problem with straddled versus legs together cast to handstands. They were going to introduce a composition penalty of 0.1 for doing a tucked sole circle on the low bar. That was the element with your feet on the bars, followed usually by a jump to the high bar. I would have liked that change, which is a change that we got anyways in 2006, actually, because I always thought that was sort of a cheap transition from low bar to high bar. They do discuss connections on the balance beam a bit. They discuss what is a connection versus not a connection. They were going to still allow forward into backward connections or connections in which there's a change in direction, like the front aerial walkover into back handspring step out, back layout step out. Nowadays, in 2019, when I'm making this video, you can still do that, but you only get series bonus. You don't get connection bonus. But they do state in this code proposal that to still get connection bonus, there would have to be, quote, a feeling of continuous dynamic rhythm from the forward element into the backward element without slowing or stopping. But they do acknowledge that those types of connections do look different than strictly backwards connections, or like a front handspring into front tuck type connection in which there is a direct rebounding effect. They were going to raise the difficulty of CD, acrobatic connections on beam, from point 1 to point 2, which I think would have been a good change. And same with DD, dance or dance acro connections. Those were going to be worth 0.2 as well. Previously, dance or dance acro connections were worth 0.1 for CC and anything higher. For some reason, the one-arm back handspring was going to be downgraded from a C to a B. I never really had a problem with that being a B. And on floor, I said that there were going to be some new connections. So an added connection was going to be indirect C through to C, so like a 1.5 twist through to a double twist. That would have been worth 0.1. And also for a direct connection of BBC. So, this relates to another change I was going to talk about in a second, which was that all basic saltos, front tucks, front pikes, whip backs, those were all going to be raised from A to B's. So going back to direct BBC, that would mean that if you did 2 whip backs immediately into a double twist, you could have gotten 0.1. Not something that would have been possible in 2004. So that means that the AE direct connection, like a whip back into a triple twist, which was worth 0.1, that connection was deleted because now whip backs and things of that nature were B elements. CD indirect was going to be added, and that was going to be worth 0.2. So that would be something like a layout front with a full step out round off back handspring into double pike, because remember that in this era double tucks were C elements. They were discussing whether to retain connection value for dance elements at all, but if they were going to, they said that it would have had to be 2 leaps from 2 different lines. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by line, but clearly they were trying to diversify things there somewhat, in some way. And they also said that CD connections would have been raised to 0.2 as opposed to just 0.1. There was also a lengthy discussion in the proposal of tour jetés. So in order for those to be counted as tour jetés, they would have had to have a diagonal line relative to the floor. A parallel line relative to the floor would not be a tour jeté, but rather a split leap with some degree of turn. There were some changes to the special requirements, because I think I said earlier that there were going to be 4 special requirements rather than 5. So on bars, they were going to delete the, in my opinion, sort of stupid requirement that you do a C element from groups 3, 6, or 7 on the low bar. I mean, I do understand the value of trying to encourage gymnasts to do things on the low bar and not just quickly get up to the high bar to do your difficulty, but I never really liked, like Corkina. She got in trouble at the 2003 Worlds, right, and didn't make the event finals because I think her clear hip circle into her Corkina transition up to the high bar, I guess she wasn't close enough to the handstand, so it got devalued to a B. She lost the special requirement, I think. This is at least what I'm deducing from some comments that Tim Daggett made in the all-around at that competition on the NBC broadcast. So they got rid of that, or were going to, in this proposal. On the beam, they merged two special requirements into one. So instead of a requirement saying you have to do a dance connection and then another one saying you have to do a split leap, they merged that into a single dance connection in which one of the elements had a 180-degree split. On the floor, thankfully, they were going to remove the requirement that you do a pirouette on one leg of a minimum B value. So you might remember Carly Patterson did sort of a random 1.5 twisting pirouette in her routine to fulfill that requirement. In terms of changed element values that stood out to me as worth mentioning at least, one was that the ray, or the toe-on into Tkachev, was going to be raised to an E, making it on par with the Rikna and the Hindorf. The double front dismount was going to be raised from D to E, something I would have supported. The Stalder into back tuck or back pike dismount off of the high bar that, like Tia Orlando did, was going to be devalued from D to C. Fine, I never really had a problem with that dismount. On beam, a front handspring on one arm was going to be raised to C, which might have been useful for certain connections. Recall that aerial cartwheels, aerial round-offs were only C elements during this era, and they were going to remain so in this proposal. But the gainer layout with full twist off the end of the beam was going to be raised to super E, which I think it was anyways. Those have been devalued again in recent years, but there was a long stretch where they were, where that element was an F element, I believe. On the floor, the split jump with full twist, so kind of like a popa, but a cross split rather than a straddle split, was going to be raised to a D from a C. The front aerial walkover with full twist was going to be raised to C from B. That would have been useful for connection value. And like I mentioned earlier, all basic saltos raised to B. Now I should say something more about that because that's pretty important. That means that you would no longer have to do something like a 2.5 twist into front layout in order to get a 1/10 of bonus. You could do a front tuck, or a front tuck with a half twist, or you could do a whip back into 2.5 twist, or you could do a whip back 2.5 twist into punch front and get a total of 0.3 in bonus for that single tumbling pass. 1/10 for each of the direct connections, and then a 1/10 for the D skill itself, which would have gotten you 30% of the way to your full start value, eliminating the need for all these sort of dance leap connections that were sort of overdone in the 2004 era. Now, one thing that I don't totally understand is why did they not just say that you could get a 1/10 from doing an A-D direct connection? Why did they just raise the value of all saltos to B's and retain the BD connection? I don't really think I understand why that was the most logical fix in their mind. They added the quad twist to the code of points, even though it had not been done, still hasn't been done in competition. Gymnasts like Nastia Liukin were attempting it. That, of course, was going to be a super E element. They also added the double twisting, double layout to the code of points, something we now call the Moors, but they acknowledge that this has not yet been performed. So I don't know why they didn't make the same acknowledgement about the quad twist. Of course, this was just a draft, just a proposal, not a finished code of points. So I'll finish with the altered element values on the vault. The front handspring, front pike with half twist was going to be lowered from 9.6 to 9.5. The tucked Rudy raised from 9.8 to 9.9, something I would have been a fan of. Double twisting Tsukahara raised from 9.9 to 10.0, and the Tsukahara with 2.5 twist deleted from the code of points. I would have been fine with all of that too. In this era, vault was typically the lowest scoring event. Most gymnasts just tried, like in the all-around, to do a double twisting Yurchenko and just sort of get through the vault. And also, there wasn't enough differentiation back then, in my opinion, between something like a Amanar and a Yurchenko double twist. There's actually going to be less differentiation in this proposal because one would have been a 9.9 and the other a 10.0. Another change that I don't understand is vault 4.401 was going to be raised to 9.7 from 9.6. I looked through my 2001 code of points, and that vault does not exist in the 2001 printed version. It must have been something added later. The closest vaults that I can identify would be 4.201, which was the tucked Yurchenko, and the 4.302 vault is the Yurchenko tucked with full twist. So what would be similar to a tucked Yurchenko but more of a D range vault rather than a B range vault? I have no idea. The Yurchenko double twist, I didn't mention this yet. You might have inferred it from a comment I made about the Amanar, was going to be raised to 9.9 from 9.8. The final change is that, or proposed change, I suppose I should call it, is that many vaults from the family of vaults formerly known as Group 5, so those were the full twisting Yurchenko vaults. I said earlier that those were going to be moved to Group 4 because they still have a backward entry. And the new Group 5 was just going to be the half twisting on Yurchenkos. But many of those full twisting on Yurchenko vaults were going to be devalued anywhere from 0.2 to 0.4, depending on which specific vault we're talking about. So for example, the Luconi vault, or the Yurchenko full-on tucked back salto off, was going to be dropped to 9.2 from 9.5. 9.5 was not its original value in my printed copy. That was actually 9.4, but at some point during the 2001 to 2004 Olympic cycle, those were raised in difficulty. Also, vault 5.511, which is not in my printed 2001 copy, was going to be lowered to 9.7. I'm assuming that is the full twist on, layout full off that was added in either 2002 or 2003 by a gymnast whose last name was something like Tankusheva. I believe she was Belarusian or Bulgarian. That was going to be devalued. There was a North Korean gymnast who did that vault in the event finals in 2003 at the World Championships. And I think, wasn't it a 9.9? Possibly a 9.8. I'm not sure. You'll have to find that out for yourself. So that's my summary of the major proposed changes. I would have been curious and excited to see what a 10.0 code with some adjustments, especially on floor, would have looked like. I think this would have fixed many of the problems in the 2001 code, but we never really got a chance to see what this would have been like. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave a comment below Or you can also find me on Twitter with an account of the same name. So thanks and goodbye for now. Bye bye.